Okay, we can start now. Hello, everybody. Uh, Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are doing well, and I hope that this session add value to everybody. And I'd like to thank the coordinator guys from OBA for facilitating this session. First of all, let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Muhammad Salah. I'm a senior geophysicist. I have been working in oil industry since 12 and 13, and dedicated on the qualitative seismic interpretation as opposed to modeling and seismic attributes. Was responsible for drilling many wells, exploratory, appraisal, and development wells. And thanks God, most of them have achieved a great success for our company and production portfolio. The session of today is about geophysical insight for successful reservoir management. And let me focus on some facts before we get into our session today. These facts, I can summarize them into 4 items. The first item is about the content of this session. It's a high-level insight, and you know, to get more information and knowledge about geophysical, it's a very big domain and huge branch. So I'm intending to overview a geophysical insight essential for effective reservoir management. While I'm not going to delve into technical intricacies and technical sophisticated workflow, but I'm going to discuss the key concepts and their applications in a way that's easily understandable for a broad audience, regardless the background you came from. Hopefully, inshallah, at the end of the session, the message will be clear. The second fact I want to highlight is the main objectives of this webinar. I'm aiming to showcase the diverse range of geophysical methods, interpretation techniques, tools, in addition to strengths and limitations of this method. And at the same time, I will emphasize the importance of integrating static and dynamic techniques to overcome the limitations of individual methods to achieve more accurate, reliable, and understanding of the reservoir. And regarding to the sources that I have used in this webinar, almost all the illustrations and figures used in this document are freely available online, and there is no confidential restrictions regarding to these resources. And finally, of course, all the credits for these materials, either illustrations or figures, goes to their own, their respective owners. Okay. Okay, before we start, I'd like to lighten the mood and speak with you with this funny joke to break the ice. Why this joke is a kind of light-hearted exaggeration, but it highlights the different perspectives and their importance and the importance of collaboration between different disciplines to ensure a successful reservoir management. As you see here in this comics or in this memes, that the geologist and reservoir engineers are discussing their jobs. The geologist says that I'm like a detective and searching for hidden treasures, while the reservoir engineers say, well, I'm like a bank robber trying to steal as much as I can. This is, of course, an exaggeration to the reality, but I hope that this joke have drawn a smile on your face before we start this might be silly presentation. Anyway, the agenda of today, we are going to cover 4 main headlines. The first headline is about geophysics. We are going to understand generally what geophysics is and definitions, its application in oil and gas industry. And we will then highlight the geophysics and the reservoir management. We will try to cover the common ground that gathers the geophysicists or geoscientists generally and reservoir engineers. Then I will cover a highlight about the advanced geophysical techniques and their applications in the process of reservoir management. Finally, we will go through the main seismic challenges in practical and how the geophysicists could tackle it and mitigate these challenges during their analysis, in addition to the promising future opportunities that accompany the seismic interpretation method. Okay, the first headline is understanding geophysics. We'll go through the definition, the purpose of geophysics, types of geophysical methods, and the seismic method. We'll start by exploring the origins and purpose of geophysical methods, as I mentioned. Then we will check the different categories of geophysical methods, active and passive, either they are conducted on the surface or on the boreholes. Then we will focus our discussion then on the seismic method as a specific tool, a specific geophysical tool. We'll discuss the different environment, dimensions, and the underlying physical principles that they are relying on. Finally, we'll discuss how the role of geophysics evolved through the field life cycle, starting from exploration and ending with the development and production, and how the data availability, the types of the data available in the geophysical database influence geophysical techniques. And we will highlight at specific points the aspects of geophysics that are most relevant from a reservoir engineering perspective. Very nice. Understanding geophysics. And as you notice from this terminology, it consists from two different terms. The first term is geo, and the second term is physics. And if we dig more about the history of the term geo, it originates from a Greek word that means earth. And earth now refers to the geology. And the geological science is a broad science and focus mainly on understanding and exploiting the earth resources while mitigating its risk. And as you know, that geology encompasses a vast array of disciplines, including environmental, mining, nuclear, engineering, hydrology, and of course, petroleum industry. While on the other hand, physics is a fundamental science concerned with matter, energy, and their interactions with each other. No need to mention that its applications are ubiquitous and extending almost in every field around us, like medicine, for example, biophysics, engineering, and of course, the petroleum industry. Okay, when we combine these two terminologies together, we get the definition of geophysics. So now we can define geophysics as the branch of earth science that deals with the physical processes and phenomena occurring in the earth and its vicinity. You can see it's a blending between physical principles and earth science to explore and understand the Earth's subsurface for practical applications. And regarding to these practical applications, we can categorize these applications into two main categories. The first primary application of geophysics is the identification and the localization of valuable resources, such as energy resources, for example, like geothermal, mineral deposits, archaeological artifacts, and our business is petroleum resources or petroleum reserves. Additionally, the second practical application of geophysics is that geophysics play a vital role in assessing and mitigating natural hazards, including earthquakes, volcanic eruption, and tsunami and so on. Okay. Now, we will dig to the types of geophysical methods. Let's discuss it from the perspective of source of the energy. Geophysical surveys can be categorized based on the nature of the energy source employed. Let me elaborate more. In the left-hand side figure, we see the passive surveying you can see the aeroplane flying and measuring the magnetic field of the Earth. And the passive surveying relies on naturally occurring physical phenomena such as Earth gravity, magnetic field, or the electromagnetic field. As these these fields or this phenomena that arises from Earth itself, that arises from Earth considered as the source of the data that's measured. Okay, these methods involve measuring variations in the subsurface of the Earth, which can reflect or infer subsurface geological structures. For example, magnetic give us an insight about the basement of the subsurface, as basement considered an igneous rock with a high magnetism behavior. So it gives us an indication about the structure of the basement. On the other hand, the gravity gave us an indication about the density of the clastic and the thickness of the basin. And another tool, which is called magnetolorics, give us an indication about the electric and the magnetic properties of the Earth, and of course, give us insight about the subsurface, specifically the property of conductivity of the subsurface. In contrast, on the right-hand side, you can see the active surveying method. This method, or this kind of survey, involves the use of artificial energy and man-made energy, not natural energy. These energy are introduced into the Earth using human-made resources, and the interaction between this energy and subsurface reflected back to the surface to be measured by receivers. These receivers then can measure the interaction between the signals in the subsurface with the materials of the subsurface and give us valuable information about the geological characteristics. Common examples of the active geophysical methods include controlled source electromagnetic techniques and our method, which is the seismic method. Okay. CSM technology, or controlled source electromagnetic techniques, works by emitting electromagnetic pulses to the subsurface and measure the impact or the interaction between these waves with the subsurface and give us insight about the subsurface conductivity properties. And the seismic method, as most of us know, we are emitting a seismic wave or a mechanical wave or a sound wave to the subsurface and measure the reflected energy that give us insight about the subsurface geology. Another type that based on which we can classify the geophysical methods, which is based on the acquisition location from where you acquire the geophysical measurements. The first type is the surface geophysical methods. The surface-based geophysical methods involve acquiring data at Earth's surface without any direct disturbance of the subsurface, without digging any holes or boreholes in the subsurface. And this method provides information over a large area, but generally offers a lower resolution. Techniques that are mainly conducted on the surface of the Earth are the seismic method, gravity method, magnetic method, and CSM technology, or TSM survey. On the other hand, the borehole geophysical method, this approach or this kind of survey deploys a receiver within a borehole to record the physical measurements at various stations or depths within the hole. The main advantage of this approach that it offers a higher resolution relative to the surface method, but the drawback of it that it provides information only around the well vicinity. It has nothing to do with the physical or geophysical properties change away from the well. The main examples of this borehole geophysical surveys like the VSP or vertical seismic profile and various well logs that matters for the seismic interpretation. And in practice, actually, a combination of surface-based approach and borehole-based surveys are often necessary to be obtained so as to get a comprehensive understanding of the subsurface. For instance, the geophysicists use well logs such as sonic and density logs beside the VSCP logs as a ground truth measurements. This is measurements that represent the reality and the quality of it is higher than the seismic. So they are using this measurements in the borehole and use it as a calibration tool by a specific technical task, which is called synthetic seismogram or well tie analysis. This approach or integration between these two approaches ensured that the seismic data is accurately calibrated to subsurface features. Okay, so the combination of them are very essential and crucial for an optimum and accurate seismic interpretation. Okay, now let's move on to the seismic methods. This is the most important geophysical tool that is used in oil industry. As we mentioned before, that seismic surveys employ a controlled energy source to generate seismic waves. This seismic wave propagate through the subsurface of the Earth. And these waves interact with the geological formations. Of course, the rule that controls the propagation of the waves in the subsurface is the wave equation. The wave equations is applied in many disciplines in science, like electromagnetic waves and the lights and so on. In our case here, the seismic wave that propagates to the subsurface of the Earth exhibit either reflections or refractions. And what matters for us in the oil industry or the seismic discipline is the reflected waves. When the reflected waves echoes back to the surface, are then recorded and measured using receivers, which are called geophones. The receivers, which are deployed on the surface, record the reflected waves that provide the variable or the geological information about the subsurface. Of course, the refraction wave also recorded, but it has a limitation regarding to the depth of penetration. Reflection waves are penetrating much deeper to the targets of reservoir, where the depth matters, or the depth is important for our industry. But refraction waves, unfortunately, have a higher resolution and better imaging, but it doesn't penetrate much deeper in the subsurface. And during the data acquisitions, the raw seismic data is collected in a form known as the shock gather form. This form of the seismic data is not ready to be used by the seismic interpreters. It doesn't represent any geological or any structural imaging. It has characteristics of a raw. It needs some processing. It needs some modification. So these data are then sent directly to the processing center to perform a processing sequence. And the processing sequence include mainly analysis that used to remove the noises, enhance the signal-to-noise ratio, and the most importantly, to create a migrated seismic image that represents the subsurface geological structure. So the sequence or the steps or milestones that seismic interpreters relies on starts with the acquisition of the data, processing of the data, and finally get the finally migrated data so as to be analyzed and interpreted by the geophysicist. Okay, regarding to the seismic methods, and you know that we have oil fields in different environments, in onshore, offshore, and subsequently there are two main types of seismic surveying according to the environment of acquisition. The first one is the onshore survey. Okay, The onshore surveying differ than the offshore surveying because of the different environments. Okay, but generally both of these surveys used to image the subsurface, and of course they have some distinct characteristics due to the different environments. For example, acquisition in the onshore environment involves deploying sources like vibro-sized tracks, explosions, and tracks in some simple applications. While the receivers are on the form of geophones that are coupled to the surface. The main advantage of this survey or this environment, it can be more cost effective relative to the offshore surveying, but and this is because the lower logistical and operational expenses. But in terms of data quality, this tool also generates a higher resolution due to the controlled environment and the proximity of sources and receivers. The main disadvantage of this surveying the seismic data on the onshore is that the geophysical or the acquisition process can be hindered by factors like vegetation and topography and other terrain limitations. And of course, some access restrictions from a governmental or environmental concerns. Uh, of course, another factor or the drawback in that seismic acquisition tool faces on the onshore surveying is the potential interference from surface noise like human activities, human interference, traffic, and wind. While for the offshore surveying, this kind of surveying or this environment requires specialized equipment and vessels. And the acquisition in this case involves deploying sources, which is not here explosive or trucks. It's here an air guns, which is used as the source of energy, and the receivers are on the streamer in the form of either phones on the surface, and in some cases another techniques used like OBN or ocean bottom cable, where the receivers are coupled on the sea bottom. Okay, regarding to the advantages of offshore surveying, it has access to vast areas of the ocean floor and the potential also for deeper penetration. In the offshore surveying, there are a little interference regarding to human activities and surface activities. And the data quality of this kind of survey, uh, unfortunately, might be influenced by the water depth and sea bottom topography and some noises that might arise from marine activities. But on the other hand, it's more expensive than onshore surveying due to the need for specialized vessels, equipments, and expertise. Now, regarding to the dimension of the seismic data, the dimension of the seismic data are categorized into two main different dimensions. There is another dimension, but it's not our perspective here, which is 4D. But what I'm focusing here from a geospatial perspective, we have two different dimensions: the 2D surveying and 3D surveying. And it's clear from their nomenclature that the primary difference between 2D and 3D seismic data lies in the dimensionality of the information captured from the subsurface. In 2D data, the data is acquired along a single line, providing something like cross-sectional view of the subsurface. While in 3D data, the data is acquired over a grid of lines and provides at the end of the processing a cubic view of the subsurface. The 2D surveys, as mentioned, creates a 2D profile, which is kind of like to a slice of loaf of bread. Therefore, it has a limited ability to image complex structures or features that are not aligned with the survey line. While in the 3D data, it creates a 3D cube. It allows the geophysicist to visualize the seismic data in almost every direction. Any direction you are like to watch, you can visualize it using the 3D data. And moreover, it performs or it gives a better seismic resolution and improve the ability of imaging complex structures. That, of course, will enhance the understanding of the subsurface geology, which will reflect at the end of the day on the quality of reservoir characterization and the simulation and reservoir management process. Okay, the important issue that I like to highlight here, why the 3D data offers superior resolution and subsurface understanding, it comes at a higher cost and often requires more complex operational procedures. Because the 3D seismic data acquisition is very, very expensive due to the need of a high density grid of lines and more equipments than the 2D. And moreover, the factor that affect this the expenses spent on the 3D seismic data is the data processing. The data processing of the 3D data is more computationally intensive that leads to higher processing costs. And at the end, interpreting 3D data can be more time consuming due to the increased complexity. The more data you have, the more complexity and the time the geophysicists use to interpret the data. Okay, subsequently, therefore, the preference of for the type of the seismic data relies heavily on the field life cycle. For example, in early exploration stages, 2D seismic data is often used beside another geophysical tools like magnetic and gravity, and used in early exploration stage to identify potential prospects and assess risks related to exploration. While in the development phase or even appraisal phase, the 3D seismic data is more commonly used to refine the reservoir characterization and optimize well placement, in addition to monitoring the production if a 4D seismic or a time-lapse seismic deployed in the activity. Okay, now let's discuss how the seismic method identify the geology using physics. This is a simple illustration or graph that illustrates the main idea that seismic methods rely on it. The left-hand side represents a geology of the subsurface, or a simple description of the geology of the subsurface. As you see here, there are different layers, and every different layer has its own different characteristics. And the important characters here that matters for the geophysicist is the acoustic impedance. The acoustic impedance for every rock is considered as the cell or the milestone or the first step for the seismic interpretation method, or the physical principles behind the seismic interpretation. The acoustic impedance is a fundamental rock property. This property governs the propagation and reflection of the seismic waves. And simply, acoustic impedance is multiplication between the rock density and rock velocity. Then, this property or this acoustic impedance of the rock are then used in these simple equations, which is called reflectivity series. This reflectivity sequence rely on the mathematical relationship between two different layers. The acoustic impedance of the second layer minus the acoustic impedance of the first layer divided by their summation. Okay, so after calculating the acoustic impedance, the reflectivity series arises. It needs to be what I mean here, that I want you to take in your consideration that this equation represents what's happening in the subsurface on one specific condition. This condition is the normal incidence of the energy of the seismic data. But in reality, there are different factors that affect the angle between the energy and subsurface, and this has sequences or subsequent factors that affect our interpretation. Anyway, this normal incident condition where the reflectivity sequence is calculated using the below equation. What happens in nature that the source wavelet, which is generated on the surface, is then convolved with the reflectivity series. Actually, that's happening in the reality. The source wavelet is convolved with the reflectivity series, resulting in the observed seismic data. Okay? And this process, known as the forward modeling, which illustrates how seismic data is generated from the geological properties. And this mathematical operation, as I mentioned before, translates the geological variations into the observed seismic signal on the normal incidence condition. Okay. While this simplified overview captures the core concepts, it's important to note that numerous factors, as I mentioned before, such as subsurface heterogeneity, wave propagation, the effects, and position conditions can influence the seismic response. Therefore, in the subsequent slides, we will explore these factors like the condition of inclined incidence and how they are used in the seismic analysis, for example, here in the AVO analysis, and of course, the inverse modeling of this process. And in this process, we are doing the opposite, exactly opposite to what happens in the reality. Okay, of course, these other factors or these other techniques infer geological properties from the measured seismic data. Now, let's move to the rules of geophysics in the oil and gas industry. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, that this rule varies significantly according to many factors. And the most important factor here, which is described in this slide, is the field phase, at which stage all the field is operating. And this rule, or the geophysicist rule, is multifaceted and evolves through the life cycle of the field. For example, in the exploration phase, geophysicists focus on identifying and delineating potential hydrocarbon prospects. They are using original scale data like 2D, gravity, magnetic data, in addition to integration with the surface outcrops. They are using these techniques to evaluate the basins from a regional perspective and recommend an optimal well locations for exploration activities. But while the exploration achieved, the field progressed to the next stage, which is the appraisal phase. And this stage, geophysicists employ more sophisticated data and techniques to refine the reservoir geometry, characterize the heterogeneity of the reservoir, and to provide more accurate reserve estimates. Then, when the field begins more mature, we are then entering to the development phase. The geophysicists at this stage focus their efforts towards supporting reservoir management activities. These activities including monitoring flow, evaluating production performance, and optimizing field development plans. Okay. Another factor, another element that influence the role of the geophysicist or the tasks that are accomplished by the geophysics is the nature of the data or the nature of the interpretation. There are two main broad types of seismic interpretation. The first one is the qualitative interpretation on the left right hand, and the second category is the qualitative interpretation. And in reality, the role of geophysics within reservoir management is influenced by the specific type of interpretation. Every type has its own outputs, has its own limitations and outcomes. Okay, regarding to the first technique, the qualitative interpretation, it focused mainly on the structural and stratigraphic analysis, which aims to identify trapping mechanisms, reservoir geometry, and the potential barriers. This type of interpretation is typically based on a piece of data which is the fully stacked seismic data. So the seismic interpreter works on the fully stacked seismic data to give an idea about the structure, an idea about the stratigraphic conditions of the subsurface. While in quantitative interpretation, the geophysicists concentrate on the petrophysical properties beyond the wellbore vicinity. So this is the main difference. In qualitative, they are focusing on structure and stratigraphic, which are the boundary of the reservoir. And in quantitative, they are focusing on petrophysical properties beyond the wellbore vicinity. And the properties that are produced from this analysis or this approach, like lithology, porosity, permeability, and water saturations, are essential property for the reservoir characterization or static model, and then for the reservoir simulation and the other reservoir management process. However, this kind of interpretation requires different types of the seismic data, includes angle stakes data and gathers. These kind of data are a little bit expensive and requires specific processing sequences to be acquired or to be processed properly. But anyway, at the end of the day, to achieve an optimal reservoir characterization, both qualitative and quantitative interpretations should be integrated together and to be calibrated with data sets from other disciplines like well logs, core analysis, and of course the dynamic data in case of reduction. Okay, now let's move to the second part or the second headline of this webinar, which is entitled Geophysics and Reservoir Management. We'll discuss the purpose of reservoir management and the integration of geoscience and engineering with the reservoir management, integration of the geoscience and the engineering, and the reservoir management cycle. Okay, the purpose of reservoir management. Now, I guess that you remember the joke that we talked earlier in the beginning of this session. I guess that here comes its projection on the discussion. I guess there are many definitions that varies according to the different literatures, technical references and papers that define the reservoir management. But honestly, one of the most interesting definition I found in this definition, which is saying the reservoir management or the purpose of reservoir management is to maximize the economic recovery of oil and gas from a reservoir while minimizing capital investments and operating expenses. You might agree or disagree with this definition, but this definition generally is a purpose-oriented definition. And actually, geology and geophysics has nothing to do with this definition. Also, it's not an engineering definition. It looks like a kind of financial, philosophical, or managerial definitions. But I guess it's important to bring it here in this context to assure on the importance of every aspect, discipline, and data sets that should be used in synergy and harmony and to be integrated with each other to accomplish this purpose successfully. The purpose of maximizing the recovery minimizing the expenses. From a technical standpoint, we can rephrase this definition by saying recovering the maximum amount of hydrocarbon from the hidden subsurface while mitigating the operational risk and minimizing the expenses. Now, I guess the role of engineers and geoscientists arise to the surface. This definition necessitates the expertise and the collaborative efforts of geologists, geophysicists, and reservoir engineers. For example, to solve the puzzle of the hidden subsurface reservoir management, to solve this puzzle, the reservoir management needs the efforts of geologists and geophysicists. And to assure the maximum recovery and safe operations and drilling, reservoir management mandatory needs the engineering efforts. Let me highlight here some statements from pioneers working in the oil industry, which is highlighting the significance of fostering a collaborative and integrated environment where different subsurface disciplines can work in a harmony to optimize reservoir management. Michel Halpot is an American geologist, petroleum engineer, and wildcatter. He's created it with discovering around 50 oil and gas fields. Once he stated that it's the duty and responsibility of industry managers to encourage full coordination of geologists, geophysicists, and petroleum engineers to advance petroleum exploration, development, and production. On the other hand, Lehman and Sessions emphasized the importance of cross-training. Imagine cross-training between disciplines, not only working together or working in an integrated environment, but he also emphasized the importance of cross-training between disciplines. And I absolutely agree with his statement, because it enables each team member to grasp the fundamental concepts and terminology used in other fields, which leads at the end of the day to a better communication and cooperation between the subsurface team disciplines. Here we go, reservoir management cycle. I believe that reservoir management cycle, like many procedures in the subsurface and seismic, for example, is not a strictly sequential cycle that needs a step-by-step process, but it rather is an iterative process. But at least the static and dynamic data considered as the first and the most important milestone in the reservoir management cycle. Okay. Why the reservoir management is iterative? Because, for example, new static, dynamic, or production data arises to the surface that will lead to revisiting and refining the initial model to incorporate the latest information. Okay, and anyway, as we might agree here that the first two milestones, reservoir characterization and reservoir simulations, are the foundational steps in reservoir management. So regarding to reservoir characterization, it involves building a reliable static reservoir model. And this foundational step involves gathering and analysis of different data sets, seismic, geophysical data sets, geological, petrophysical, and fluid properties. This is very essential for building a reliable static model. This static model then is shared with the engineers. The engineers, on the other hand, ensure the compatibility of this model with the data they have by doing his analytical approach before proceeding directly to simulation. After he feels comfortable with his analytical approaches, then comes the dynamic modeling, where reservoir simulation, which is for one of the main definitions, is the mathematical model that is created to simulate the fluid flow and predict reservoir behavior under different scenarios. Okay. However, after running his or building his simulation model, he then calibrate this model through history matching. So there is a kind of iterative and many running iterations for his simulation. After history matching, by optimizing parameters and collaboration with the geoscientist. And after every run, or after every trial, he come back to the geologist or the geoscientist till they are feeling at the end satisfied with the results after the history matching is achieved. So these processes, the first process, reservoir characterization and reservoir simulations, are very crucial for driving the subsequent reservoir management activities. Such an integrated approach fosters engineer capabilities in production forecasting and reservoir monitoring and well placement, and at the end of the day, production optimization and performing a strategic implementation of enhanced oil recovery. And by the way, one of the most important reservoir management activities in this cycle or in this workflow after the reservoir characterizations comes to the 4D time lapse or 4D seismic data analysis. We are going to cover it in the next slides. Okay, now we reach to the third headline of the webinar today, which is the advanced geophysical technologies and their application in the reservoir management process. We are going to go through some advanced and sophisticated techniques, which are mainly related to a quantitative interpretation, as I mentioned before. These techniques are seismic inversion, the EVO and the AV analysis, and 4D monitoring. Okay. Now I'd like you to recall the slide where I discussed the physics behind the seismic method. You remember when I have presented a graph which represents the geology, then the calculated reflectivity series, then the wavelet, source wavelet, which is convolved with the reflectivity series to give us the measured seismic data. This approach was called what happens in reality, actually, and we can refer it as a forward model. In seismic inversion, we perform exactly the opposite to what happens in the nature. And through the inversive process, the geological data are then identified and interpreted. The seismic inversion can be defined as the process of inferring subsurface parameters, such as rock properties and fluid contents, from measured data by solving an inverse problem. Essentially, seismic inversion involves modeling a wavelet. This wavelet, which represents the source signature that have been deployed while acquisition. This modeled wavelet then is used in this process, in seismic inversion process, by applying mathematical process opposite to convolution, which is deconvolutions, which results in creating a clastic impedance. A clastic impedance cube. This is this graph, the seismic data or the reflectivity data, and this is the elastic impedance. The main obvious difference between the two sections, the first section or the seismic data or the measured data, represents only the interfaces between layers. It has nothing to do with the inner characteristics of the layers. While the seismic inverted cube or the seismic inversion which here is the elastic impedance or the seismic impedance, represents a characteristics within the rocks or within the reservoir. By obtaining this seismic impedance cube, it's used for identifying essential petrophysical informations. So from the impedance cube, these petrophysical informations can be calculated and derived. While there are numerous seismic inversion techniques exist in the business, but at the end, they all share the common goal of identifying the reservoir properties, including lithology, porosity, and fluid saturation. Another geophysical technique here is the AVO analysis or AVA analysis. This terminology stands for amplitude variation with offset or amplitude variation with angle. If you remember also in the slide that we discussed the physics behind the seismic data, we have highlighted that the reflectivity series represents the normal incidence. But this assumption doesn't happen in reality. In reality, the waves are moving in a spherical shape. So it hits the subsurface in different angles, and these different angles are reflected back to the surface. So uh, as it's obvious from its name, it's a geophysical technique which examines the amplitude seismic reflection variation with the distance between the source and receivers. This graph represents the change of the amplitude of the waves with the angle or with the offset. And on the right-hand graph represents the cross plot that displays two main AVO attributes, which is intercept and the gradient. And what happens that the variation of the amplitude with the offset or angle actually varies according to geological conditions between the reservoir and the sea rock. And the geophysicist, after analyzing this variation and using his own analysis and cross plots, he can give an insight about the type and lithology, the type of the lithology and the type of the fluid content within this lithology, as obvious here in this graph. And as I mentioned in a couple of minutes, that the main two AVO attributes is the AVO intercept and AVO slope or AVO gradient. The AVO gradient measures the rate of a change. If you look at this curve, the AVO gradient or the slope measures the rate of a change of the amplitude with offset. The rate of a change is sensitive to the changes in the elastic properties and properties like B wave and S wave are affecting the rate of a change of the amplitude or the slope of the amplitude. Okay, on the other hand, the AVO intercept attributes represent the amplitude at zero offset. If you look at this graph, the zero offset here is at this point. So the AVO intercepts for this AVO class is 0.10 as I see. Okay, anyway, this zero offset is related to the bulk modulus of the rock. So this modulus is essential for identifying some characteristics of the rock. In practice, I have mentioned the seismic inversion and the AVO, but in practice, both of them are complementary techniques and are often used together to enhance understanding of the subsurface. And finally, I guess that this technique that most of you guys or most of reservoir engineer guys are very happy with it, which is a time-lapse seismic tool. It's It's important to note that many geological problems and analysis primarily focus on the geospatial domain. They are looking on the geospatial aspect, the variation of the property in the geospace domain. However, in reservoir engineering, the temporal aspect is equally crucial, like the geospatial variation, and both of them are essential for effective reservoir management. That's why here the 4D seismic data have its superiority in terms of temporal analysis. The 4D seismic analysis offers a unique geophysical solution that incorporates the time factor into the analysis. Rather than relying only on the static conditions, the time factor playing an essential role here. The principle of the time-lapse or the time-lapse seismic analysis involved studying the changes in the seismic signature due to production activities. And that's conducted by comparing the initial and the subsequent seismic surveys acquired over different time after period of production. As you see in this illustration here, that in 1984, the seismic data acquired can give an insight about the fluid contacts between oil and water. After years of production in 2005, the seismic surveys was acquired to at this time and showed the changes of the seismic anomalies and referred these changes to the change of the fluid content of the reservoir. And this gave the geophysicist insight about the variation of the fluid content. And analyzing this difference provides insight into the fluid movement within the reservoir. That's, of course, enable the reservoir engineer to monitor and build an informed decision for a better reservoir management. As you see, for example, in this map view, the seismic amplitude at 1987 and the clear oil-water contact has significantly varied after in the 1996, where the contact of the oil have moved, and at the same time indicates allocation of pi bass oil and the water flow path. This, of course, is very interesting tool that helps in reservoir management. Finally, this is a fourth and the last item in today's session, where I'm going to address the challenges and the opportunities that exist in reality, to set the expectations and to land with you to the reality of the seismic data in business. The first item is the data quality issues, and the second one is the geological complexity and how we can mitigate these limitations and the challenges of the subsurface and the data quality. And at the end of the session, we will go through the future or the developed technology that is used in the seismic analysis. The first one, data quality issues. Actually, many geophysicists aspire or dream to find a multiple free seismic data without multiples, with exceptional signal to noise ratio and high frequencies and minimal processing artifacts. But this ideal scenario is often unreal and elusive. It's not existing in reality. I know, of course, some datasets exhibit fantastic quality and imaging, but each dataset has its associated processing techniques, has also its inherent strength and limitations. As illustrated in this slide, there are various data quality issues that can arise during the interpretation. One of the most common challenge is the noise. And The seismic noise can be random, coherent, or multiples. Multiples actually the nightmare. Seismic multiples are simply the echoes of the primary signal. If the primary signal here, for example, if this is a source and this is a geophone, the primary signal here will be at this point. But what happens in the case of multiples, that signals are reverberate many times within the rocks till it reaches the surface. So the echoes of the primary signal bounce in the seismic section appear deeper in the seismic section. And honestly, it could be a nightmare in many cases if these multiples are not demultipled properly during the processing stage. Why it's a nightmare? Because it can obscure genuine reflectors. These multiples or these echoes can cover the true geology and will also give a fake geological features, which leads at the end of the day to misinterpretation. Okay, so it's very critical. Another issue here related to the seismic data quality is the seismic resolution. The seismic resolution, uh, uh, if we look to the Earth is acting as a natural filter, actually. This filter attenuates the high frequencies at shallower depths and preserving the low frequencies at deeper zones. And unfortunately, the deeper zones uh, contains our reservoir. So many reservoirs reside in the deeper zones. So this limited resolution hinder the ability of the seismic data to resolve subtle and minor geological features, and they cannot be, of course, at the same as the well data. The well data have a better resolutions, which of course is not in the seismic data. Another issue here regarding to the seismic data is the processing artifacts. In processing, if the data is not improperly processed, such as, for example, unmigrated data or data have been migrated using an PSTM technique, for example, pre-stack time migration, the artifacts might arise, and this will lead to misinterpretation of geological features. For instance, in this section, the pull-up phenomena can occur, and the seismic data is artificially shifted upwards due to the high velocity anomalies. And this is not the reality. This is not the geology. The geology, that these reflectors or this structure is much deeper, but because of improper processing or using an PSTM and improper technique for the complex geology, it results in a false geological structures. And this is misleading, by the way, and may result in a failure in some cases. Another issue here regarding to the limitations of the seismic data is the geological complexity. In some cases, despite employing a state-of-art technology like ocean bottom cables or ocean bottom nodes acquisition, and also you can apply advanced processing techniques like RTM or FWI migration techniques. But the geological complexity can still pose significant challenges in the seismic data. And this affects our understanding, or this affects the quality of the data. Factors such as the heterogeneity of the subsurface, either lateral or vertical heterogeneity, if it's coupled with the structure complexity, it can influence the quality of the seismic data. And these geological complexities can introduce distortions of the signals and might result in artifacts into the seismic data, which make the processing hard and which is make also it's difficult to obtain a clear and reliable representation of the subsurface. So all these factors affect the quality of the modeling, structural modeling, static modeling, and of course, the reservoir simulation and management at the end. Okay, what to do with these challenges? And actually, in business, there are several approaches that can be employed to mitigate these limitations in the seismic data. One strategy, and for me, is the most important strategy in such cases, is that integrating diverse geological, geophysical, and dynamic data sets to mitigate or to cover the gaps of the seismic data quality and also calibrate the model of the geological model or static model that comes from the seismic data. Another approach here is to explore an alternative interpretation scenarios. And at the end, these scenarios could be validating through different analysis. Additionally, reprocessing of the legacy data using modern techniques like RTM or FWI, for example, might result in a better data quality. And if feasible, a seismic acquisition can be conducted. All of these factors help to specifically the acquisition and the processing might help in improving the quality and the reliability of the informations derived from the seismic data. Now, let's move to the opposite side of the challenges and discuss the seismic future. Actually, we're living in an era of rapidly evolving technology, and both reservoir engineering, seismic interpretation have witnessed significant advancements, and seismic methods in particular have witnessed significant technological innovations throughout the acquisition, processing, and interpretation stages. And it's important to note here that these technologies, which I'm about to discuss with you, are not merely predictions or hypothetical future technologies, but they are already being applied in certain conditions and have the potential also for a broader adoption and further development in the future. As illustrated in this slide, the seismic acquisition operations can now be performed automatically using autonomous surface vehicles without any human intervention. This might lead to, of course, a faster and more efficient acquisition of a large, complex seismic data sets. And of course, also, this would facilitate the data acquisitions in a challenging environments where the human or the traditional seismic acquisition approaches cannot be conducted. This is for acquisition. While in processing stage, a technology like quantum computing offers a promise of significantly accelerating and improving the efficiency of handling large and complex seismic data sets. The techniques or the process or the sequence which is deployed in the seismic data processing that takes months could be achieved in weeks or a couple of days in some cases. Of course, this has an impact on the time and of course on the cost of the processing. Finally, regarding to the interpretation, there are technologies like data fusion, or some people call it multi-physics integration in different papers and literatures, as demonstrated in this image. In this kind of integration, one can enhance his understanding of the subsurface by combining different geophysical data sets. For example, in this section here, the seismic data is is convolved with or is overlaid by the CSM data. CSM data is the controlled source electromagnetic techniques. It's also an active surveying method where electromagnetic waves are deployed and the conductivity properties of the subsurface are identified, which reflects the conductivity changes or the resistivity properties of the subsurface, which is of course has a good relationship with the hydrocarbon. In this case, as you see here, the data fusion techniques or multi-physics integration techniques help it in obtaining a pattern rather than only defining the structure of the field. A factor like conductivity properties give an insight about the fluid which is failing this structure. This is, of course, a very interesting technique. Additionally, in the seismic interpretation, machine learning and AI algorithms can be employed either for the qualitative interpretation and the quantitative interpretation. And this technology helps in accelerating the productivity and identifying anomalies and detecting subtle geological features that might be overlooked by using the traditional methods. And in some cases, these techniques could represent an alternative solution to the traditional geophysical approach, or also in some cases could be a unique solutions where the traditional seismic solutions can be deployed for different reasons. For example, the absence of the data. Let's say, for example, someone is conducting seismic inversion, but he don't have the proper data for his process. Machine learning can work on the stacked seismic data and give him a qualitative and quantitative interpretation. That's very, very interesting, actually. So here we go. And finally, this is the conclusion of our session today. And let me wrap up and focus on the main messages that I liked to convey in today's webinar. The first message is regarding to the petroleum geophysics. Uh, as we mentioned before, the petroleum geophysics encompasses a wide range of technical aspects and applications that significantly impact reservoir management process. So it's essential for reservoir engineers to understand the specific techniques employed by geophysicists in their perspectives, in their analysis, and how these techniques can influence their evaluation throughout the reservoir management cycle. The second message here that geologists and engineer, or geoscientists and engineer, should collaborate effectively in an integrated team environment to optimize the productivity. As in such a collaborative setting, the team members can work closely together and share insights and comprehend each other's needs, capabilities, and limitations. And finally, the seismic data has its inherent strength and weakness. And it's also crucial to recognize what seismic analysis can and what it cannot achieve. In many cases, seismic data requires ground truth and calibration to provide an accurate solution and an optimum model establishment. Here we reach to the end of the webinar today. Thank you so much. I hope that you have found some intuitions about the geophysics and its relation with the reservoir management, or have added a little value to your practical and engineering technical aspects. Thank you so much. Is there or any questions? I'm welcoming. Thank you, Selma. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, people. How could you implement prospecting methods and capture seismic data efficiently in areas with geological and structural complexity? I guess that we highlighted this issue, isn't it? If not, you can. Okay. How could you implement prospecting methods? Okay, in areas where there is a complex geological structural or stratigraphic complexity, there are some recommendations which is which is needed before deploying the seismic acquisition and processing, and finally the seismic interpretation. For example, the latest technology in the seismic acquisition is the OBN techniques, ocean bottom nodes in the offshore environments. It gives us uh, the most reliable 3D seismic data by giving a high coverage of the subsurface by increasing the number of folds. The number of folds means how many times the subsurface points have been recorded. In ocean bottom cables or ocean bottom nodes give us the most reliable acquisition technique for imaging the surface. Moreover, the processing techniques itself, after acquiring a high quality data, the processing techniques which is deployed after the data acquisitions has a crucial impact on the data quality. If, for example, in a complex area or a geological complex heterogeneous area, the seismic processing used a cheap migration techniques like pre-stack time migration, it will end in very, very, very bad quality data. But in such cases, the optimum data or the optimum processing techniques or algorithms in migrations is the RTM migration or reverse time migration techniques, or the full waveform inversion techniques. This, of course, would mitigate the uncertainties and the limitations that arises from the geological, the complex geological features. And after that, after acquiring the state-of-art seismic data for interpretations, the geophysicist should rely on also integrating his perspectives or his interpretations with the different geological and dynamic data. That would help greatly in refining the structural and the stratigraphic complexity of the subsurface. Can we get presentation materials? Yes, of course, I can handle it with the coordinators. The synergy between the seismic and their synergy. Of course, this is a mandatory step. The mandatory step for the seismic interpreter is to integrate the geological data, which represents in the well data, with the seismic data. And to be more specified here, an essential step in the qualitative seismic interpretation called a synthetic seismogram. The seismic interpreter at this stage use the well-logged data to tie the geological information with the geology. What he does exactly, he is using the sonic data, which represents the slowness. The slowness is the reciprocal of the velocity, okay? So he used the sonic data, either acoustic or shear sonic, and the density data. Now, if you look at these two logs, they are representing the core item of the seismic. We can derive from sonic and density what we call the acoustic impedance. So the reflectivity series can be calculated. Then when he model the wavelet, he can convolve this wavelet with the reflectivity series to have an identical seismic trace, which is calibrated with the seismic. That this approach helps the seismic interpreter to identify where are the geology or where are the surface peaks in the subsurface. This is an example for qualitative interpretation. The differences between the 2D and the 3D seismic data, I get that we highlighted this issue, but no problem, we can repeat it again. The most important difference is that in 2D seismic interpretation, the data acquired from the surface represent only a slice from the subsurface, a vertical slice from the surface. It looks like that you are looking to the cake, the layering of the cake from one side. While the 3D seismic data involves acquiring the data in a grid shape geometry that results in having a cube of the subsurface. This cube enables the geophysicist to look at the subsurface from different angles and from different orientations. This is number one. Number two, an important difference is the quality of the seismic data in the 3D is much, much, much higher than and accurate and correct over the 2D seismic data. Because simply in the seismic migration step, the point on the subsurface is migrated to its real position, considering that the wave is moving in a sphere shape. So the point can be corrected from everywhere around its vicinity. But in 2D, there is no vicinity data which can be used in the migration. So simply, the 3D seismic data gives a more accurate, higher resolution than the 2D seismic data. And another perspective here, that 2D data is preferred in the initial stage of field life cycle, in the exploration stage, while the 3D seismic data is preferred on the later stages for the appraisal and the development stages. Okay. Okay. The hyperbolic streaks. If you mean the raw data, the shock gather data, hyperbolic streaks, this is because the variation of the offset between the source and receiver. If I got your question well, you mean the shock gather, but I didn't present shock gather here. But anyway, in the shock gather, you will find the hyperbolic shape of the reflectivity. And this is due to the variation of the offset between the source and receiver. For example, the same point in the subsurface recorded many times with different offsets. So this point in the wider offsets will be recorded later in time, and the next offset will be recorded later, and so on. So this phenomena resulted in hyperbolic streaks of the shock gather, and this issue is cured in the processing stage. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. And I have this. Of course, the seismic waves are changing its speed according to the medium. Every material, every medium, either it's in the subsurface or in your office, has its own physical characteristics. The sound waves moves differently according to the different materials. Not only the velocity of the seismic wave that changes, but also the density of the material also changes, of course. So these two physical properties are very essential for the seismic interpretation, and also are very essential in the quantitative analysis. Of course, thank you, PA team. Okay. Exactly. Of course, really give us more accurate information. Thank you. Thank you, Visual. Thank you, guys. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very pleased that I was among you guys. Hope we meet again in different occasions. Thank you so much. Have a nice and happy moment. So